Hi all, I have another very interesting Magnus Carlsen game to show you. This was from the Norway Chess in round 3. Magnus Carlsen was playing white against Alexander Grischuk. Let's have a look. d4 from Magnus. We see knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, and now the Grunfeld defense. Magnus takes. This is pretty standard. Bishop g7 here. Now bishop e3 was played. More common. Bishop c4. That was played a lot in the Karpov against Kasparov World Championship matches. But there's also knight at f3. For example, like this. Has been seen a lot with an interesting pawn sacrifice on a2, which avoids the exchange of queens. So there's some tension in this position. Very interesting position there. So there's at least two different interesting paths here. But bishop e3 is up there as one of the main moves. c5, rook c1, queen a5, and queen d2, saying basically not minding the exchange of queens, protecting a2, and black actually castled here. Knight f3, bishop g4. If black wanted to, c takes d4 might be a way of trying to equalize, but perhaps Grischuk was after an entertaining sort of game. This kind of thing where black seems to reach some kind of equality. If white's aggressive, it seems okay. Technically, it seems as though it might be okay for black. But Grischuk kept the tension in the game. He played bishop g4. And we have d5 now. So the rook ready to supporting c3, so this is made possible. b5. This is very interesting. So very aggressive play from black in a way. Sometimes the idea of c4 and to use the c5 square for knight can go into c5. And then maybe to a4 to hit c3 again. So c3 seems to be a big target from the black point of view. If black played bishop takes f3, trying to double the pawns, this is quite nice for white after c4. It seems f4 taking away e5, and if e5, white can eventually get a really good position here, or even bishop g2 here is possible, and white with the bishop pair is going to look forward later perhaps to f4 and e5 with a big advantage. So b5 was played, not going for the doubled pawns. Bishop e2, knight d7, white castles, and now Grischuk volunteers the light square bishop. So this is a bit of a double-edged move. Both sides have their own specific imbalances to celebrate. So white with this light square bishop, what sort of damage could be done? So bishop takes f3 here. Now this doesn't. This means that c4, knight c5, knight a4 could be one of black's big plans. On the other hand, this knight going away from the king side means that is this pawn chain here quite vulnerable to undermining, for example even with an h-pawn, but also because of the light square bishop without a counterpart, ideas like bishop g4 to e6, especially if f takes, emerge. The light squares are to be celebrated, and this pawn chain is a light square pawn chain as well, so there could be a bishop sack later against it as well. We see c4, so black playing on the queen side, Magnus perhaps not just playing on the king side, but also this central pawn here could be something of interest to sometimes use. Bishop e2, rook fd8, and it looks looks really quite ambitious from a certain perspective, this move f4, because it looks as though here that actually, okay, there's knight b6 to a4 as well to hit c3, and also en route isn't d5 hit. So it's as if there's a self-pinning with that pawn, and there's also pressure on c3. So black's prospects, from a certain perspective, look quite promising here. What is white doing about this e6? The queen's just a sitting duck there, just holding c3, and there's knight a4 coming. So does this look as though there's some sort of crisis emerging here? But what can chill out a crisis is the ability to sacrifice a pawn or two at the right time. We see bishop f3, queen a3, so keeping the pressure on a2 as well as c3, and now for knight a4. But now here is where the action on the king side tries to balance black's queen side play, h4, trying to strike at this pawn chain. So really quite instructive stuff is going on here on both sides of the board. e6, and what about the pressure on d5 here? Isn't this slightly awkward? We see h5, knight a4. If, for example, just to get some flavours of the position, e takes, there's actually e5. This actually represents quite a powerful pawn sacrifice. For example, like this position where the bishop can be comfortable on d4, so c3 is not really an issue, and this knight seems out of play, and hammering into black's queen side with rook takes b5. For example, black still has to look after the queen side. If we look at g takes, that's even worse. Again, this pawn sack is quite nifty, and white can play on the king side with a later f5, so this would be quite crushing. For example, like this is an example of devastation. So there are some real dangers emerging, it seems, on the king side already here in the variations. So knight a4, putting pressure on c3, hg, and now celebrating the light squares. Yeah, you can be chilled out. It's not a crisis if you're prepared to sacrifice pawns. f5, just offering c3 for both knight and bishop. So let's examine those. But it's also trying to pierce into these light squares, which this light square can then further attack the shreds of this pawn chain. We see e takes f5. So on knight takes c3, what happens? Well, f takes, and then bishop g4. You can see that this bishop's really powerful, and black's king is put under real question here. So for example, like this, e5, queen f2, going into f7. The queen's in Siberia here in this position. Black's pieces were too consumed with materialism, and bang, bishop c5, for example. This is just winning the house, this variation. So if e takes here, let's have a look. e5 is very dangerous. So shielding c3 there, and if this kind of thing, then actually f7 comes under great fire here. So bishop takes f7. That f file is really dangerous. And in this variation, let's go back. Instead of queen e7, knight takes c3 here. Yeah, just taking is safe enough. So on bishop takes c3 instead, then queen f2. This is a really nifty maneuver, just leaning over the king side, leaving these pieces kind of stranded. So the materialism is kind of punished with the light square celebration. Look at this. This is really quite devastating. Now queen d2, a quick, elegant. Bishop h6 now threatened. And d6 disconnects the queen from e7. So for example, this variation is leaving white absolutely winning after bishop d7. So only the exchange up, but absolutely winning. Well, I'd say only, but that's enough at this level. So there's all these variations which show taking on c3 is really dangerous here. White's ploughing into the king side. E takes was played. E takes, queen d6. The bishop nudges the queen. Check. King h1. G takes. Now we see d6 dislocating black's position and offering d5 as a parking space for this bishop, looking at f7. Rook a b8, bishop d5. Black cannot play rook takes d6 here because of now bishop takes f7 would win the queen, but that's a resource which may be useful for black soon. So we see knight c5 under the right circumstances. Black tries to shield f7 to be able to play rook takes d6. We see bishop g3, knight e6 shielding f7, but things are looking a bit dicey here after rook takes f5. White has a really nice f-file attack. This bishop without a counterpart is a huge piece for white in this position. Now black does try this exchange sack, rook takes d6. Rook d7, funny enough, the light squares really come together concretely after rook takes f7. This is devastation, this position. White doesn't even need to get the exchange back. White can simply, if black's doing nothing here, paralyzed, you know, if the king moves then takes, white can just arrange queen h7 checkmate in that variation. So if, yeah, rook d7, rook takes f7 would be a killer move here. Let's see. And also if king takes f7, just for the record, this is just so massive, the attack for white. It's devastation. White can win the queen, for example, there at least, and then mate. So we see rook takes d6, so offering exchange. Queen e3. This is en route, by the way, to f3, so where it would hit f7 and protect the bishop. So dual purpose square, queen f3, beautiful. Queen b6, queen f3, so that's reached. And black is now in dire straits after rook f1. Look at that pressure on f7, knight d8. And now, switching attention, black might have been able to get a check, a cheeky check, but that's extinguished, as well as white now threatening to checkmate on h7 pretty soon. After queen c7, queen e4, threatening checkmate, to which there's no real defense. The game ended here. So if knight e6, just put it on the board, queen h7 would be checkmate. So that's like the culmination of white's light square strategy, in fact, where pieces are on the light squares here, checkmating the king. So c3 wasn't such an issue in retrospect, it seems, the way it was played. So a really fantastic attacking dynamic game. I think maybe there's an influence from Leader and AlphaZero, the way Magnus played this, how dynamically. Leader is especially good against the Grunfeld when the king side is kind of a little bit weaker than usual, because black's often trying to win material on the queen side. So those imbalances, if white can celebrate them, especially the light square bishop without a counterpart in this game, which was volunteered from black, as they showed, it can be really dangerous on the light squares later. I hope you enjoyed this game video. If you did, please check out the bit.ly link, which you can register at my chessbowl.net site, which has been going on for more than 15 years. I'm playing hundreds of people at the moment in my own current games. So if you use that link and register, I'll be able to invite you for a game. So I hope you check that out, that bit.ly link, or you can play against other YouTubers. And turnstile chess in general is pretty chilled out. Celebrate your imbalances with a lot of analysis, etc. So I hope you check that out, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks very much.